Welcome to Authentically Debz, my podcast. A Southern girl looks at 70. When I finally did set out for California, and this was for the long run, it was August 1991, and I was driving my little red Daihatsu. No, they don't make them anymore. I remember vividly that it had no air conditioning, since I had purchased it in San Francisco, where one generally doesn't need an air-conditioned car, and at the end of driving 11 hours a day each day for 2.5 days, I felt when I reached the Motel 6 both nights that I had ridden a horse for hours. That's the kind of tired there's really no words for. And I remember my girlfriend in Manhattan Beach, still my best friend, whom I would be staying with when I got to SoCal, until I got my own place, said to me over the phone, "Don't kill yourself getting here. The city will do that." And she meant LA. Very encouraging. Yet I was at least a little excited to be returning to Cali, but this time SoCal, where since I was 20 I had wanted to call home, and now it finally would be, will be, and still is. So I had not seen my best friend, this girlfriend whom I would be staying with, for a few years. She had since married for the third time. She finally got it right. This husband was a gem. He had been in love with her for years, since high school really, and she had finally come to her senses. As I recalled, she was the president of a family company and traveled a great deal, sometimes worldwide. It just so happened that shortly after I arrived, she and her wonderful husband were going on such a trip. I knew him too because when I had lived with her, mid-70s for a brief period of time, she had just divorced and was still dating this would-be rock star, and this wonderful man that is now her husband would come back from Hawaii where he lived and would always bring us leis. He adored her from day one. Anyway, they were going on a trip, an overseas trip. They also had 2 Rottweilers, and that was just before I became a dog person, meaning I didn't hate dogs. I like dogs. And I was much more allergic to cats, and I think she had a cat too. But I remember that one of the Rotties acted really ferocious, and he smelled fear, as dogs do. And his name was also Boomer. Never name any animal, and that includes humans, anything that is also an onomatopoeia. They become their name. And if you want to know what onomatopoeia is, Google it. So Boomer thought he was a boomer, and he was. Although my friends attempted to train me how to handle Boomer, I found that my best trick was just to give him commands, but never look him in the eye, because that seemed to engage him, and not in a positive way. I was to care for the 2 Rottweilers for a couple of weeks while they were away without Boomer killing me. No small task, I strongly felt at the time, but I did manage with just the one trick of the eye I mentioned. Had I known then what I know now as an animal person, which I am now, what I needed to do was to establish some kind of empathetic relationship with the dog. I mean that. Now I truly like animals better than I do most humans. They are real and they are honest. And how many people can you say that about? In short order, after their return, I got my own place in Manhattan Beach, near my friend. It was a small beach apartment. I stayed there, but had to make a short visit to San Francisco because my incorrigible oldest daughter had now had a baby there in San Francisco with her dumbass boyfriend. When I held my little granddaughter for the first time, her blue eyes were striking. Well, everyone says babies' eyes will change, but guess what? Hers never did. They are blue to this day. And with a mixed ethnicity, like all of us, hers being black and white, her eyes have been her signature feature all of her life so far. My daughter, her mother, with all of her mental and emotional problems, had no business having a baby, but c'est la vie. Little did I know then, but soon I would be raising this beautiful child as my own. Also, when I returned to SoCal in Manhattan Beach, I was able once again to rather quickly garner a special ed teaching position in Redondo Beach, a very close neighboring city. In SoCal, in LA, you tend to go from town or city to another without knowing the cities have changed, except for the signs, in case you're looking. And very shortly thereafter, my daughter, her infant child, and boyfriend drove down from San Francisco, stopping through to see me on their way to Arkansas, where both of them were from. As much as I didn't want to take on my problematic daughter and her new family, having come to LA to finally do what I had longed to do, live there and make my living sooner or later as a working actor in film, TV, and soon internet, for the life of me, yes, in 1991, I could not let them, all in good conscience, go to Arkansas to live, not a mixed couple with a baby. Her father, my ex, the last time I checked, was a redneck racist, and so was most of Arkansas, frankly. I thought I knew what adversity they would face down there. So I insisted, and it didn't take much persuading, that they stay with me until they could get their own place. Ha! What ended up happening, of course, is that my one-bedroom beach apartment was too small to accommodate all of us, so I moved us to a larger two-bedroom, not in Manhattan Beach, but in Redondo Beach, which was a little less expensive. I don't think my daughter worked for the months they were there with me, but her boyfriend actually got a job at Target. Then one night, when they were out, and I was keeping the baby, who was old enough now to want to sleep with me every night. I mean, who could blame her? Yes, we were definitely bonding. But it was long after myself and the babe had gone to bed, I got a call from Heather, my oldest daughter, who had been out that night. She was in the hospital. It seemed that her charming, I say that in jest, boyfriend had beaten her to a pulp. I will mention at this point that he too was a major alcoholic, and when he drank, there was a wildness in his eyes like nothing I had ever seen, until I was assaulted a few months ago by a student. I saw that same wildness in that student's eyes, but that's another story we have to look forward to. After her boyfriend and father of her child assaulted my daughter Heather, he was promptly arrested at the laundromat where my daughter had talked him into stopping so that she could use the restroom, ostensibly. What was happening in the car was that he was definitely under the influence, but he would talk to her or scream at her or holler at her and then punch her in the face repeatedly. Anyway, Heather described to me how the Manhattan Beach police, where that laundromat was, whom she had called on a payphone as soon as she got inside the laundromat. Yeah, they had payphones then. Picked her boyfriend up off the ground and slammed him onto the hood of their car, cuffed him, and the rest is history. The Manhattan Beach Department doesn't play, perhaps with a little racism thrown in, but that night I didn't really care because my daughter's safety took precedence over anything they might have done to him. Sorry. He was taken to jail, and not for the first time, I would soon become aware. Luckily, my daughter recovered fully with mostly cuts and lacerations to her face, but that was enough for me, especially when she elected to stay with the abusive piece of shit boyfriend after he was released from jail. I told them both to hit the road, and I meant it, to where was no longer my concern, and I would keep my precious granddaughter. I had to get an attorney for purposes of establishing custody and guardianship, and I remember the fucking boyfriend showing up in court dead drunk, trying to explain to the judge that he was representing himself to try to fight my custody case in family court. No big surprise, he lost. I had excellent legal representation, but I don't think he would have won anyway. And as we left the courthouse and granddaughter and I were driving away, she was probably close to 2 years old then, her in her car seat and me in the driver's seat. The boyfriend was seen by us, or by me, not by her, thank goodness, walking somewhere. Anyway, I remembered that he flipped me the bird and yelled at me, calling me a bitch. Peace at last, just me and Mariah. I had named her, by the way. My daughter has remained in SoCal to this day. She saw her daughter often, but thank God, erstwhile boyfriend did finally return to Arkansas. Thank you, Jesus. I never knew that I could love someone as much or more than my two daughters. But this granddaughter, who had literally fallen into my lap, became everything to me. The choice to raise Mariah, and it was a choice, did cause me to choose to put my acting career on hold and go back to school to earn my master's so that I could continue to teach in California. But that was okay because Mariah and me had a blast. It's the best thing I've ever done in my life so far, I think. I got a certainly undeserved second chance to be a better parent. I remember we went to Disneyland, spending the whole weekend there at the Disney Hotel. We even drove to the Grand Canyon and stayed for 2 days, staying in a make-believe western town filled with cowboys, horses, saloons, gunfights, and a real train which was held up by robbers. And then there was the Grand Canyon itself. Words cannot describe. If you haven't been to the Grand Canyon, you must go. It will take your breath away. And Mariah, age 8, that day had made friends with a young photographer who wanted to photograph the canyon up close, beyond the barriers. Before I knew it, Mariah was following her to the edge, and she lived for me to talk about it. Oh, terrifying. Mariah was a natural athlete. I was possibly inheriting that ability. No, not me. She was possibly inheriting that ability from her no-good father. But she did excel, really excel, in all sports she participated in, including softball, which was her favorite, but also golf, tennis, soccer. Although I did, she just didn't have the burning desire to pursue any of them seriously, like beyond high school. I was especially excited about her possible golf prospects. I had golf pros offering to work with her for free, but alas, she didn't want it nearly enough to go to the next level. So much for my living vicariously. I mean, she took golf in high school, but when you take golf in high school, those are usually taught by teachers who just want to play golf, and that allows them to do that. You really have to study with pros, and like I said, they offered to teach her for free. Anyway, Mariah was beautiful, strong, and most importantly, a really good person. She was very popular. She was well-grounded. We also traveled together to Las Vegas. When I looked down, and she was in tears when we were kidnapped on the elevator on the Star Trek adventure. And this was actors acting this out by some space bad guys. I wasn't that much of a Trekkie, but at that time in Las Vegas, and this was, 20 years ago, they had turned it into a family city. It's no longer that. But each hotel at that point had a special attraction for kids. And we stayed at the MGM, but we went to every hotel on the Strip that had a special thing for kids. And that was the Star Trek adventure. And we walked a lot in Vegas as we went from hotel to hotel. But we would drive, and sometimes we would self-park, which meant we had to walk a long way to get into the hotel to go to that attraction. I remember Caesars had a kind of an unusual attraction. They had statues that came alive at, I believe, 4 p.m. daily at that time. But sometimes we would pull into a hotel, and rather than self-park, Mariah would sometimes say, "Grandma, let's just valet," when we were tired of walking and self-parking, as if valet parking was part of our regular world. Anyway, we had a blast. When I was raising Mariah between age 2 and 15, we also traveled to Hawaii to my friend's renewal of their wedding vows. This was my best girlfriend and her third husband, the one that she should have married all along. Mariah was about 10 years old and had not been to Hawaii before. We were in Maui, and we had a ball. Besides the wedding ceremony, we went to a luau, swam in the ocean. It was really like paradise for us. It was also the millennium, New Year's Eve, and everyone was worried that the world would come to an end or all sorts of bad things would happen, especially technologically, with the beginning of 2000. But nothing did, of course. We had a big party on the beach, let some beautiful handcrafted paper barrels float away into the night sky, and all was well. The only thing I remember happening that was weird and stood out was that one evening at a new restaurant there with friends, Mariah and I went to the guest restroom together. When we left our respective bathroom stalls, Mariah was excited and wanted to get back to our table because they were having that luau. She flew out of what she thought was a door to exit the restroom, but in fact was glass, and she hit her little head so hard that she was concussed, as we found out at the emergency room there New Year's Eve. All ended well, though. I look back now fondly at all the good times we had during those years I raised her, because now things aren't so good between us. However, before I end this podcast, I think that changes. In fact, I know it does. Again, I'm quite sure that my OCD had something to do with it, but when she was little, or at least before 15, I always set the agenda. I remember she would frequently say to me on days when I wasn't teaching and she wasn't going to school, "Grandma, what are we going to do today?" Because truly I planned everything. She did start picking out her own clothes during the preteen years. Bummer for me, because that is one thing I loved doing. But I planned everything else, sports, church, vacations, etc. And until she was 15, she let me. Then the unimaginable happened. My perfect child, straight A's, excellent athlete in all sports she tried. I think the only one I didn't mention before was volleyball, because for all purposes, Mariah was my daughter, and I didn't even mind always being the oldest mother. But that was when Mariah returned to live with her mother, and the world got to see once again what often happens to a child born when a parent is using. And in my daughter's case, it was crack that she was using when Mariah was born. Her returning to live with her mother was also my fault in a big way. I had begun having what became a years-long affair with a man that I hate to say I loved. Looking back, I think I really loved the man that I wanted him to be, but wasn't by a long shot. And that was sort of what I did, you know? I went with these brilliant men who were horrible people. But I hadn't had a relationship for years while I was raising Mariah. It was only when she was approaching her mid-teen years. And this is something I wish I could have skipped. It was just after 9/11, and there were so many red flags given off by this man of mine at the time, but respectfully from BoJack Horseman. If you see the world through rose-colored glasses, as Pisces like myself tend to do, all flags look the same. I will say that during my time with this man, all of the OCD meds that I had been taking for years now, I stopped taking. He didn't think I needed them because, of course, that would have made me think straight. None of my close friends, and especially my granddaughter Mariah, the person I loved most in the world, liked him. Nobody liked him but me. Even when I received a home visit from the FBI telling me that this man was participating in mail fraud, I brazenly looked the other way. With my OCD now running wild again, I actually sent my precious granddaughter to live with her mother cross-country to Pennsylvania after she had lived her entire life to that point in SoCal with me. And this was at the urging of the asshole man I was seeing. He said it was time she went back to live with her real mother, and I unconsciously bought it. Drank the Kool-Aid, hook, line, and sinker. At the time, my daughter in Pennsylvania was a housewife taking care of Mariah's younger half-brother, whose father was a big-rig truck driver in Pennsylvania covering the Northeast Corridor. And although Heather didn't marry Mariah's father, she did marry her young son's father. And his name was Chris, and he was the trucker. And her son's name, my grandson, who I adore, his name was Isaiah. His name is Isaiah still. And this was due to the fact that Ferguson, I'll just use his last name, wanted only me and to isolate me, and especially my credit score. He wanted that too, to continue with his criminality. No doubt my biggest mistake and lesson of this incarnation on the planet, I am convinced that although I didn't leave Mariah with her mother for too long, just a few months in fact, the fact that I chose this horrible man over her had a grave impact on her young life and mine, as it turned out. She was upper elementary age at that time, actually in middle school, and by the time she left to live with her mother, my relationship with him was totally ending, badly, but ending. Bottom line, Mariah never really trusted me fully again, and with her soon-to-be probably genetic makeup beginning to show its face, she was never the same either. I have since forgiven myself, but I don't believe Mariah has yet. As it turned out, by the time she left me at 15, long after she returned to live with me, after living with her mom in Erie, Pennsylvania, the coldest place in the United States, because it got the cold weather from all of the Great Lakes, for a few months, my time with the white-collar criminal was almost over, but Mariah was too hurt by then and she had seen enough. Ferguson, the con artist boyfriend who, when I met him, had planes, trains, and automobiles, and whom I truly lost my mind over, was convicted in 2006 of a Ponzi scheme. He scammed a couple of small potatoes compared to what Murdoch did in New York City, but he destroyed lives nonetheless, including mine to a large degree, and he did end up serving 11 years in a federal prison in California. I guess he's out now. I mean, he should be. I won't be ever having anything to do with him again. I didn't know anything about this man's criminal behavior, even when I had the visit from the FBI, which was after we'd been seeing each other for a few years. I just believed everything he told me. I had decided that I would love this man back to normalcy, or back to being the kind of person I wanted him to be. I had to play that out. Believe it or not, I had begun my spiritual quest. I went to God with this, and I just simply could not completely abandon him before it was too late. So it's just part of my karma in this incarnation. Speaking for myself, I had to hire a very expensive defense attorney so that I didn't join him in prison. And as a result, I had to withdraw all of my teacher retirement account money to pay that attorney, which turns out to be important in my current life situation, since I am now 70 and would love to retire. But now when I retire, I will not be drawing the retirement that I would have drawn had I not had to have taken it out during that time. Ferguson's criminal activities were done prior to my meeting him and right after I met him when he lived in a high-rise in Marina del Rey. He had just retired from his venture capitalist supposed career. But my closeness to him for several years made it look really bad for me. And soon after his retirement, purchased a property on a beautiful ritzy golf course and community in Henderson, which is like a suburb of Las Vegas. And he wanted me to put that house in my name. He paid for it, as it turned out, I'm sure, with other people's money. But I said, sure, okay. So I signed that I owned that home, which had to be purchased by some sort of money, which I certainly didn't have. And looking back, he also used my credit score, and I think a lot of the things he bought for me, I probably paid for. The FBI had been tracking him for years, as it turned out. Suffice to say, things also changed rapidly regarding my granddaughter Mariah's life. Her mother, who had by that time moved back to California, divorced the husband she was living with in Pennsylvania, and now had a new live-in boyfriend, allowed Mariah's new boyfriend to move in with them. Wow, what a change to Mariah's life. And I just so wish that this could have been done differently. But shit happens, and sometimes we allow it to. From myself, my ex, her grandfather, her mother, and her father, Mariah easily inherited the propensity for addiction, alcohol, and otherwise. After she went back to live with her mom, she earned a DUI at age 15 when she and a crazy girlfriend, she was now hanging with a completely different crowd. She and I had lived primarily, well, the last few years anyway, in Manhattan Beach. I had moved her over there, and that's where she went to middle school because the schools were a little better, the community was a little richer. But when she moved back in with her mom was still in Redondo Beach, so she went to that high school. So she earned this DUI at age 15 when she and, again, this crazy girlfriend took her mother's car while she was sleeping, while mom was sleeping, after getting drunk on her mother's booze. Remember, my oldest daughter, is also an alcoholic. They drove to a party of a teenager whose parents were away. Her mother lived in North Redondo, further from the beach, They drove to a friend of theirs whose parents were away for the weekend, who lived in South Redondo, very near the beach. And both of them were in a very drunken state when they decided to drive home in that inebriated condition. Well, they did miraculously arrive home uninjured, but by the time I arrived, Mariah was in the back of a police car. Because on their way driving home drunk, my daughter and I were listening on the phone to them because they were talking to my daughter. And apparently they somehow shared the driving en route home. It couldn't have been more than a few miles. But they damaged many people's property driving home by hitting parked cars, fences, etc., with my daughter's car, which was completely totaled. When I got to where they were in North Redondo, they almost made it back to my daughter's home, but not quite. There was no tire any longer on one of the wheels. My granddaughter was in the back seat of the police car. My granddaughter actually knew the police officer who had arrested them. They were friends. When Mariah was in elementary school and they had this DARE program, I think it was something like DARE to stay off drugs, Mariah won out of her whole school. And so she knew this police officer. But I looked at her in the back seat and she said, "Grandma, I know you didn't raise me this way." And I think her alcohol limit was like triple what it should have been. And I think had she not been in such good shape, I mean, it could have killed her. She had so much alcohol in her system. So her DUI did entail court appearances, mandated 12-step meetings, and a very interesting visit to the LA County morgue, all of which I attended with her. I especially wanted to see that morgue. It was quite the experience. We went in, and first of all, some cop showed us a video of a car crash, and it was terribly graphic. I think he showed us, I'm sure with their permission, the picture of the family before the crash and the picture of the family in the aftermath of the crash. I think it was a head-on collision by a drunk driver who hit them. I don't know whether that driver lived or died, but the whole family was killed. And it showed what happens to a human body when it's impacted at that speed by metal. A person's face can be mashed to where all you see is a big smile. Really no head, just a big smile. It was the most graphically horrible thing that maybe I've ever seen. And then he talked to each of the young people that were in there and probably embarrassed them further. And then we were taken on the tour of the morgue. It was interesting to me because it stank. I'm not sure that's the right grammatical way to say that, but it smelled awful. And there were people in there working, obviously doctors, nurses, staff, coroners. And we even saw people that were taking a lunch break down there, just, having lunch. And the next room, there would be autopsies going on. Or maybe no one was doing the autopsy at that point because they were having lunch. But I don't know that this is the way all autopsies are done. But they had opened the chest of the individuals, and there was nobody around the individual. Just the chest was just cut open. And I remember one that was certainly striking for me, as it must have been for my granddaughter, and that was a little boy. Then we saw cadavers on gurneys, naked. Men, I'm sure, but especially I remember the women. Then we were led through a room in which all of the corpses were wrapped up, but we were told, and I'm sure this was for the benefit to scare the youngsters, that these were the people that were brought in that had some type of infectious disease. And so we naturally wanted to get through that room pretty quickly. It was very enlightening. just one of the many things that she had to do in reparation for what she had done that night. Luckily, they didn't kill anyone, but they certainly damaged a lot of property. Although Mariah did graduate from high school, her alcohol addiction was only the beginning. Her boyfriend that her mother had let move in with her had by this time turned her on to methamphetamine, a true killer of anyone who thinks they can beat it without professional help. I teach incarcerated youth now, and I would say close to half of the kids we have come in addicted to meth. It's, I guess, the new crack, and heroin is also making a huge comeback. Sadly, for 10 years, my precious oldest grandchild has been living with that addiction. She's clean now for a year, and whether or not she's permanently destroyed her future, it really remains to be seen. Myself, the eternal optimist, believes she will continue to overcome it, but this has easily been the saddest event of my life to date. It also completely obliterated our relationship for almost that long, something that I could not have even thought possible. She is really like my third child, beautiful and precocious, and then the drugs hit. And we are only one of millions of families who've been decimated by the same. Something that I tended to just kind of gloss over, I think, when I was talking about my relationship with the criminal Ferguson, was that when I went to court with an excellent defense attorney, the judge, and also my attorney, thank God, was good friends with the prosecutor who had been tracking Ferguson for years. And they decided, and the judge ultimately decided, that I would get 5 years probation, but that I would have to get a felony because that's the only way that they could make what they were going to do to Ferguson stick. And that's big. I must tell you, that still feels pretty damn big. I ended up okay. My granddaughter seems to be okay now. This is something that I would not wish on my worst enemy. And I really don't have any enemies any longer. As for me, during all this time, I've done one play since I arrived in Los Angeles in 1991, one film. All that time, I've also been a special education teacher, gravitating away from the severely physically and mentally challenged children of all ages to high-risk high school youth, first at a continuation school, what they call a probation or non-public school, and I now teach at juvenile hall. Well, actually, I don't right now, because subsequent to my writing this memoir, certain things have happened, which I will share with you shortly. But when I got to teaching incarcerated youth, which I am still doing, at what I would call juvie, that's the only time that I have felt I found my niche in education. It was always a day job to me. I got to where I was very competent at it in teaching the physically and mentally handicapped kids, and I had some brilliant orthopedically handicapped kids who had to be suctioned for their breathing. And these are all medical procedures for which we were not adequately trained as teachers and paraeducators, I felt. Many of these kids had to be catheterized. Many had to have their diapers changed. Some had to even be tube fed, which was my least. I didn't like that. Well, I'm sure the child didn't like it either. But to me, that was something that should have been done by a nurse. So I taught that group of special needs kids. I taught all levels from preschool all the way through high school. And when I finally arrived at this incarcerated high school age, I was home as far as teaching. I call it the ER of education. It is like an emergency room. You never know what's going to happen. And I would say that almost every kid that I've taught in the juvenile justice system has arrived at jail, at juvie jail, with PTSD. post-traumatic stress disorder. And I can honestly say that if I much teach a little longer, I found my niche. Like I said, at Juvie. It's still my day job from which I will soon seg into the arts full time, but I know I will always be involved with my kids. They've given me more than I could ever give them, and working with them has truly helped me through the estrangement of my oldest alcoholic daughter, and hopefully helps me relate more effectively with my now 28-year-old, still challenging granddaughter, Mariah Jan, who has been clean and sober now for, well, we're close to a second year. And there's so much more that I have but glazed the surface of my life on this planet this time. I hope you're going to stay tuned, because this was the point at which I was going to end my memoir, so to speak, and then I was going to kind of open it up to people who might like to talk to me about their life, possibly, can relate to my life in some way. But a few other things have happened that I need to share with you, and then we'll open it up. I have promised to tell you the truth, and that I've done, my friends. So I just have a few more things to share with you, and then we're going to open this up, and hopefully we can talk to each other. That's my wish. Thanks for now. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to Authentically Debz. And if you like my show, please subscribe, leave a review, and definitely tell a friend. Oh, and make sure to visit my website, where you can keep up with my current projects, learn a little more about me, and follow my latest news. And that website is www.deborahjangray.com. The spelling is Debora, no H, Jangray. And most importantly, blessings to everyone.